and I don't even know who's going to raise my children, or if I'm ever going to be able to ever hug them again or comfort them.
"15 women, 15 convictions, and 15 different reactions to receiving life sentences. These 15 women committed horrific acts, and juries found them guilty, sentencing them to life in prison. Here's how these criminals reacted when the gavel banged, sealing their fate. Jodi Arias.
It is ordered. The defendant shall be incarcerated in the Department of Corrections for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias met at a work conference in 2006. That same year, Jodi joined his church, was even baptized by him, and moved to Mesa to be closer to someone she believed was her soulmate. But friends and family of Travis didn't have the best opinion of her. They believed she was obsessed with Travis to the point of stalking him and sabotaging any of his other relationships. Even in the days leading to his passing, Travis had told friends that he'd grown scared of Jodi. In 2008, after friends hadn't been able to reach him for days, they entered his apartment and found him lying in a pool of his blood. According to the coroner's report, Travis had sustained 27 stab wounds, had defensive wounds all around him, and had been shot in the forehead at point-blank range. The coroner also determined that the gunshot had been done post-mortem after Travis had already passed. Jodi was an immediate suspect for several reasons. She'd been staying at his residence around the time he'd been found. She'd also recently dyed her hair and had gotten a rental car that was found to have contained a red substance when she returned it, and she changed her story several times when police questioned her. Ultimately, Jodi's defense to first-degree unaliving was that Travis had it coming. He'd been hurting her throughout their 2-year, on-again and off-again relationship, and had hurt her that day as well. The jury, however, saw images from a digital camera found in Travis's home that contained pictures of the couple spending the day together before one final image that showed Travis bloodied after he'd been attacked. The trial began in 2012 and lasted till 2013. Several witnesses were called on behalf of both sides to the stand. Travis's side claimed that he was a compassionate individual who was fearful of Jodi. Meanwhile, the defense argued that Jodi was a victim herself, and even claimed that Travis had certain urges that made him a sociopath. In the end, however, a jury found that Jodi had premeditated the unaliving, stealing a gun from her grandparents' house, renting a car to go to Mesa in secret, and leaving the scene without telling anyone, and recommended a life sentence. As the verdict was read, Travis's family smiled and hugged one another. Crowds outside the courtroom began cheering and chanting. Leticia Stauch.
He had one of the guns, and I was terrified. So terrified.
In January 2020, Leticia Stauch reported to the El Paso County Sheriff's Department that her 11-year-old stepson, Gannon Stauch, was missing. She claimed that he'd left home around 4 that evening to walk to a friend's house. Initially, investigators believed that Gannon might have run away from home, classifying him as a juvenile runaway. Days later, they reclassified the case and began looking into Leticia's history with her stepson. Leticia had a whole list of defenses ready when investigators told her that she was a person of interest in this case. She claimed that Gannon had stayed home from school that day because he was ill, and they spent the whole day together until 4 in the evening. Later, in March, when Gannon's body was found in Florida with stab wounds and a gunshot wound, she changed her story and claimed that she was not guilty by reason of insanity. Leticia wanted everyone to believe that she had dissociative personality disorder and therefore wasn't in control of what happened when she unalived Gannon. Her 5-week trial began in 2023. The prosecution had a whole list of witnesses who testified on behalf of Gannon and how he was the sweetest boy anyone had met. Meanwhile, the defense only called a single witness to testify, a psychiatrist, to allow Leticia's insanity plea to go forward. However, the jury rejected her plea. In the end, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole plus 156 years by Judge Gregory Werner, who called her actions the most horrific I have ever seen, and said that she deserved the maximum sentence that I can impose according to Colorado law. Lori Vallow Daybell.
How long have you lived here?
Like 3 weeks.
Oh, geez. Yeah, okay.
That's why the neighbors don't know us.
Gotcha.
Like, hi neighbor, sorry.
The media referred to her doomsday mom. That's because Lori Daybell was convinced that she was a deity, sent on Earth to help Chad Daybell, the Messiah, complete his mission. Both Lori, Chad, and her brother Alex had deviated from conventional Mormonism and started a doomsday cult of their own, led by Chad. They believed that the world would end in 2020 and that they had to absolve their family before then. Police first believed that something wasn't right when Lori's 2 children were reported missing in September 19. They then found out that the couple had only recently gotten married after both their spouses had passed away under mysterious circumstances. In fact, they'd gotten married just 2 weeks after Chad's wife, Tammy, had passed away. Laurie's nephew-in-law, Brandon, later told investigators how there'd been an attempt on his life, and he believed that Laurie, Chad, and Alex were responsible. Police eventually searched through Chad's property and found both of Laurie's children's bodies at the site. They then had enough evidence to charge her with the unaliving of 4 people and the attempted unaliving of another. Laurie stood as her own defense attorney, trying to throw out the case with whatever legal jargon she could. However, the jury ultimately decided that she'd premeditated the unalivings with Chad to hide their affair, claim insurance money, and start a new life. In the end, she received a life sentence for each case she was tried in. Chad, on the other hand, received capital punishment, but Alex had already passed away before his sentencing could begin. Pamela Smart. At 22, Pamela Smart began a relationship with 15-year-old Billy Flynn. Besides the obvious, the other complication in their relationship was Gregory William Smart, Pamela's husband. Pamela had met Billy at Winnacunnet High School, where she worked as a media coordinator. The two began a relationship in 1990, and Pamela allegedly told Billy that she was withholding intimacy from him until he took care of Gregory. Together with a few of his friends, Billy staged a crime scene at the Smart residence, a burglary gone wrong. Pamela told investigators that she returned home to find her place ransacked and her husband deceased. However, the teenagers caved immediately when confronted by the police. One of Pamela's friends, who knew of her affair, agreed to wear a wire to incriminate Pamela. Her court case was one of the most widely watched court cases in US history because it was one of the very first that allowed television cameras in the courtroom. According to the prosecution, Pamela wanted her husband gone to avoid a lengthy divorce and cash in his life insurance. The prosecution also claimed that Billy and the other teens were also victims in this case. The jury agreed with the prosecution and sentenced Pamela to life in prison for conspiracy and witness tampering when she tried to convince the boys to lie about the affair. Since being incarcerated, Pamela's completed 2 master's degrees and has filed countless appeals. In 2023, she asserted that she still keeps up with what Bill's doing because she believes he'll come clean about what the truth was eventually. Michelle Blair. Police were called to Martin Luther Apartments in Detroit, Michigan, in 2015 to carry out an eviction notice. Michelle Blair hadn't paid rent on her apartment for several months now. The single mother claimed she'd fallen behind after hitting hard times and had been avoiding the landlord for as long as she possibly could. However, a judge granted the landlord's request for an eviction, and police arrived at the scene to move her belongings out of the apartments. In the middle of the chaotic move, they found something terrifying: the bodies of 2 kids, a 13-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy. The children were identified as Stoney and Stephen, 2 of Michelle's 4 kids who hadn't been seen or heard from in several months. Apparently, Michelle had unalived both children after individually accusing them of hurting their youngest brother. The other 2 children were found with a relative and handed over to Child Protective Services teams. In court, Michelle recounted the details of what she'd done to Stoney and Stephen without remorse. She claimed that she'd unalived her demon children and that she felt no guilt for it. In fact, she pleaded guilty, and a judge had to hold off on that plea till a competency test proved she was mentally fit to stand trial. According to the coroner's report, Michelle had suffocated both children in a fit of rage, and her gimmick of wanting to protect the youngest child wasn't fooling anyone. The surviving children testified how their mother would regularly hurt them just the same. In the end, the judge found her guilty on all counts and sentenced her to serve a life without parole. In court, Michelle went as far as suggesting that she would gladly take the maximum punishment if that's what it came down to, proving that she never loved any of her children. Doris D.D. Moore. In 2006, Abraham Shakespeare's world was turned upside down when he won a $17 million jackpot. However, he would later claim that he was better off broke. After winning the Florida lottery, Abraham accepted a $17 million payout out of the $30 million, and since then had to face multiple people in court who believed that they were entitled to the millions just like him. This began taking a toll on Abraham, who before then was just a casual laborer. Doris Moore managed to wiggle her way into Abraham's life and convinced him to start a company, Abraham Shakespeare LLC, to keep the funds growing. Instead, she took out $1 million from the company and bought herself expensive cars. In April of 2009, friends and family of Abraham's suspected that he'd gone away to live his life in the Caribbean, somewhere after they hadn't heard from him in months. However, police got a tip that he'd actually been unalived by Doris and was buried in her backyard. Sure enough, the body of Abraham Shakespeare was exhumed, and it was determined that he had passed away from a gunshot wound. Doris changed her story several times, blaming Abraham's passing on drug dealers, robbers, and even her 14-year-old son. She eventually stuck by the claim that she'd unalived him in self-defense. However, the prosecution argued that Doris, like everyone else, was after him for his money. They determined that in the days since unaliving him, Doris had been using Abraham's phone to text people and keep up the ruse that he was still alive. A court found that Doris had premeditated the unaliving and planned it very carefully. They also determined that Doris was a regular con artist and Abraham was just another one of her victims. In the end, they gave her life without the possibility of parole. Kimberly Kesler, Tangle's hair salon in Fernandina Beach, was covered in police tape in 2018 when police determined that a hairdresser there had been unalived by a co-worker. Kimberly Kesler worked with Jolene Cummings, and everyone believed that the two of them got along fine. In fact, when Jolene didn't show up to a scheduled visit to pick up her kids from her ex-husband, the last person anyone suspected was Kimberly. Police initially arrested her ex-boyfriend, whom they accused of threatening and stalking Jolene. However, when police reviewed surveillance footage from Tangle's hair salon, they saw Kimberly disposing of trash bags, washing her shearing scissors, and transporting large amounts of cleaning supplies in her truck. Kimberly immediately became a person of interest, and she was arrested while sleeping in her vehicle at the interstate. While Kimberly's never really given a reason for the unaliving, the prosecution believes that she feared Jolene was onto her. Since the 90s, Kimberly's been using different aliases as she moves across states. So far, she's had over 16 aliases, and Kimberly Kesler isn't even her real name. The police claim that Kimberly flew into a rage when Jolene called her fake, and the two were at odds. She figured that she could unalive Jolene and then make a run for it, this time with another fake name. But investigators caught her before she could make an escape. In court, Kimberly had to be restrained several times after she caused several disruptions. She'd also gone on a hunger strike, claiming that she wouldn't eat until she was released. Unfortunately for her, the judge found her guilty on all counts and sentenced her to life in prison. Shayna Hubers. In 2011, 28-year-old Ryan Poston connected with 20-year-old Shayna Hubers on Facebook. The two soon started a relationship, which friends and family described as very volatile. For the next 18 months, they would continually fight, break up, see other people, and then get back together again. Shayna had accused Ryan of being self-centered and vain. So in October 2012, when she called 911 to report that she'd shot her ex, she told arresting officers she'd done it to give Ryan the nose job he'd always wanted. Shayna then claimed that she'd unalived him in self-defense before being left alone in an interrogation room where she began pacing, dancing, and claiming, "I did it. I did it. I can't believe I did it. I'm so good at acting." Obviously, this didn't sit well with the jurors who believed that not only had Shayna premeditated the unaliving, but that she was happy about it too. Ryan had confided in several friends that he wanted to end the relationship with Shayna permanently, but was afraid of breaking the news to her. He'd claimed to have moved on with someone new and knew that Shayna wouldn't take it too well. He was right. Shayna even bragged to a cellmate that she'd unalived Ryan and claimed that she would plead the battered wife defense to get away with it. However, a jury saw through her act and sentenced her to life in prison. Katherine Magbanua, a well-reputed and well-liked law professor, Dan Markell, was shot and unalived at his Florida home in 2014, and no one could figure out why. Dan had written several best-selling law books and was employed as a law professor at Florida State University. It wasn't until 2 years later that police finally had a lead and arrested Sigfredo Garcia, one of 5 people connected to Dan's unaliving. At the time, back in 2014, Dan was embroiled in a custody battle with his ex-wife, Wendy Adelson. Their divorce was settled in 2013, with 50-50 custody of their kids being granted. However, when Wendy told Dan that she'd planned to move to Miami with the kids, he filed a legal claim that forbade her from relocating with the children. This irked both Wendy's mother, Donna, and her brother, Charlie. According to investigators, Charlie and Donna wanted Dan gone, and they contacted Katherine Magbanua, who was in a personal relationship with Charlie and had mothered 2 of Sigfredo's children to carry out the assassination plot. A court found that had it not been for Katherine accepting a large chunk of money for the plot to unalive Dan, he would still be alive today. After a 2016 mistrial, Katherine was tried again in 2022. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree unaliving, 30 years for the conspiracy, and an additional 30 years for the solicitation. Jalysa Thao. Even on the day of her sentencing, when she was handed life in prison for the unaliving of her 6-year-old son, Jalysa Thao addressed the court with profanity. In 2022, she was stopped for having a busted-out taillight and one of her tires being blown out. In the trunk of the vehicle, police found the body of 6-year-old Eli Hart. Less than 2 weeks before, Jalysa had just won a lengthy custody battle with Eli's father, Torrey Hart. Torrey had tried everything to be awarded sole custody, even recalling the times when Eli had to be sent to foster care over concerns of Jalysa's parenting. Eli was released back into Jalysa's care, despite Torrey's warnings. In 2022, she was arrested after Eli's body was found wrapped in a grey blanket in the trunk of her car. According to witnesses, Jalysa had recently learned how to use a shotgun and would often carry the weapon in a grey blanket. According to the coroner's report, Eli had sustained several shotgun injuries that contributed to his passing. In court, she claimed that she was innocent despite taking a plea for second-degree unaliving. Per Minnesota law, this gave her a stronger chance of avoiding life imprisonment. Ultimately, a jury believed that she was guilty on all counts and sentenced her to life behind bars. Nicole Nackman. Nicole Nackman's lawyers argued that she'd suffered an emotional breakdown in 2015 after years and years of emotional anguish brought on by her mother. In 2015, after failing to secure housing from Florida State University, Nicole flew into a delusion that her overbearing mother would unalive her. Therefore, she beat her to it. She traveled for hours from Tallahassee to Carrollwood, where her mother and stepfather lived. She first unalived her stepfather and then spent 2 hours meticulously cleaning the crime scene, waiting for her mother to arrive. A neighbor claimed that she heard Miriam Diniz pull into the driveway as usual, followed by a blood-curdling scream, and then witnessed a shadowy figure disappearing from the home. Investigators have since concluded that the shadowy figure was Nicole. They arrested her immediately, and she claimed that she suffered a mental breakdown. She stated that her mother had made her feel terrible her entire life, and she was sure that not securing housing would add to the anguish. However, the prosecution claimed that she'd unalived her stepfather and cleaned the crime scene meticulously, proving premeditation. In an 18-minute phone call with her brother from prison, Nicole seemed giddy and believed that she'd be released soon. She even told her brother that he would become the favorite now. The jury believed she was competent to stand trial and found her guilty of all counts, sentencing her to a life behind bars. Taylor Schabusiness. Tara Pakanich was shocked when she discovered the severed head of her 24-year-old son, Shad Thirion, lying in a bucket in the basement of her home. In February 2022, Shad was picked up from his mother's home by his girlfriend, Taylor Schabusiness. The two had been in a volatile relationship, which Tara disapproved of. They'd often get together with other friends and use illegal substances. During this particular weekend, Taylor picked up Shad from his home, while Tara and her boyfriend planned a weekend getaway. Sometime in the night, Shad and Taylor returned to the residence after using substances at another friend's residence. Together, they made love throughout the night, and at some point, Taylor claimed that Shad insisted she strangle him. Her defense team argued that Taylor acted on Shad's instructions, but because of the influence of substances, things got too far. The prosecution, however, claimed that she continued to use the metal chain that was used to strangle Shad for up to 5 minutes, even after he'd begun coughing blood. The prosecutor also claimed that Taylor continued to make love to Shad's deceased body into the morning, after which she beheaded him. She also removed the organs and placed them in plastic bags, the tote, cardboard boxes, and the bucket. Taylor initially planned on pleading not guilty by reason of insanity and put on a show in court. She tackled her defense attorney and, over the course of her trial, changed legal counsel several times. A judge eventually sentenced her to life imprisonment, and she's currently serving out her term at the Taycheedah Correctional Institution. Brittany Norwood. In 2011, Brittany Norwood unalived her co-worker, Jayna Murray. The case received widespread media attention because of the crime scene, a Lululemon store. Apparently, Jayna had checked Brittany's bag at clockout and found that she'd stolen a pair of pants. She then called the manager, who said she'd deal with it in the morning. Brittany went home, while Jayna stayed behind to count inventory and close up. Sometime later, Brittany came back claiming she'd forgotten her wallet, but actually came with the intention to unalive Jayna. The next morning, she staged the store to appear as if two men had broken in, robbed the store, and unalived Jayna while tying up Brittany. While she was initially treated as another victim, investigators eventually found holes in Brittany's story, especially when they saw that her minor wounds were nothing compared to what Jayna had sustained. They also found that she'd moved her car from the store location. When questioned, Brittany claimed that the robbers had ordered her to do so. Ultimately, a judge saw through her act as well and sentenced her to life in prison. Sheila Eddy. Skylar Neese did everything with her two best friends, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. The trio had met at University High School in West Virginia and had reportedly been inseparable since the day they'd become friends. They did everything together, even sneaking out to use substances and drink alcohol. This didn't impact Skylar's academics in any way, and she continued to be an honor roll student on her way to going to law school soon enough. But then, in 2012, on a random night, Sheila and Rachel decided to unalive her. Skylar was seen on CCTV sneaking out of her room to meet up with the girls. They went together to a spot where the two girls tackled Skylar to the ground and unalived her. It wasn't until 6 months later, and after an extensive search, that Rachel finally caved. She claimed that she had been remorseful since the moment they'd unalived Skylar. Apparently, Sheila and Rachel were in a relationship, and they were afraid that Skylar would tell their conservative parents. This was the only way out, according to them. While Rachel showed remorse for her actions, Sheila did not. A judge considered their age, all 16, including the victim, during sentencing, and allowed life in prison with the possibility of parole. Sheila's not due for parole until 2028. Brooke Crews. Brooke Crews became the center of a heartbreaking case from Fargo, North Dakota in 2017. She lived in the same building as 22-year-old Savannah LaFontaine Graywind, who was late in her pregnancy. One August afternoon, Savannah went upstairs to Brooke's apartment after being asked to try on a dress and didn't come back. The community launched a huge search. Days later, officers found a newborn in Brooke's home. testing confirmed the child was Savannah's. Brooke gave different accounts at first, then admitted her role in court, telling the judge she was responsible and expressing remorse. In early 2018, she received a life sentence with no chance of parole. Courtroom video shows her speaking softly to the judge and listening as the sentence was read, while family members described their loss and hopes for the baby's future. The child was placed with relatives and is being raised within the family.